This podcast is brought to you by the Urban Land Institute Baltimore Council's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. This committee is committed to creating an environment where everyone is valued. Welcome to learn, connect, and grow by setting standards for equitable engagements, advocating for inclusive policies, and empowering authentic partnerships to enable equity within our organization and industry. The DEI Committee has created a series of podcasts to assist you in navigating the difficult terrain of equity and inclusion in your workplace and industry to promote an environment of shared learning and growth. These podcasts will be released quarterly. All right, so hi everyone. I'm Takesha Barnes.
And I'm Kevin Porter.
And we are the members of the ULI Baltimore DEI Committee. This is the second installment of the podcast series focused on the 10 principles of equitable development. The name of this episode is called Moving at the Pace of Trust. And we have our special guests, Elaine Asal and Courtney Morgan, here to discuss their combined experiences with us in regard to community development and engagement as it relates to principles 9 and 10 of the 10 principles. Thank you both for joining us, and I will give it over to you both to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your work.
Great, thank you. My name is Elaine Asal. So currently I work with Gensler. Gensler is a global architecture and design firm, but we have an office here in Baltimore. My current role has sort of evolved over the years. I've been with Gensler about 19 years now. My current role is a strategy director for our Southeast region. And as part of that, I've been living in kind of the strategy space for a number of years within Gensler, probably the last, 12 to 15 years of my career there. And within strategy, that's taken a lot of shapes. One of the things that's been really important to me over that time, and especially like living in a city like Baltimore, community engagement and the kind of principles and activities around equitable development has really become something that I've been able to participate in quite frequently. So I've been able to, over the course of my time, we've built up a group called the Public Engagement Lab at Gensler. So that's led by myself and my partners, Genevieve Will and Midori Mizuhari in LA. And we've been able to create this network of people that are focused and interested and supporting intentional community engagement as part of large projects. And that can, again, take a lot of shapes at an organization like Gensler, but certainly trying to infuse a stronger methodology, point of view, and approach that we can make sure is built into the design process and something that we're advocating for on behalf of our clients and with our clients. So it's been a pretty interesting space to be in, and very excited to kind of continue to see this being highlighted and elevated in conversation. So very, very thankful to be here today with you all.
Hi, and I'm Courtney Morgan. I am the owner and president of SCARD, which is a studio for collaboration, research, and design. We're currently based in Baltimore, and just recently, we're just registered in Brooklyn, New York. Woo, very excited about that. Mm-hmm. And so we'll be doing work in both New York and in Maryland. But I would say, like Elaine, I'm moving from the space of architecture into strategy. And so for me, my work really shows up in different ways around helping communities advocate for themselves within capital improvement projects. And for me, that really shows up in many different ways, from, I would say, like working with small scale developers, doing pilot projects on how to potentially like address the vacant housing crisis in Baltimore City. It also shows up with working with government agencies to figure out how do they start to layer in community engagement in development projects. So it's really taken on many different roles. And then I'm also an educator. I teach design strategy at Parsons in Manhattan. And so they're really trying to work with students who are coming from all over the world and really helping them think through what strategy means for them. So really layering in different frameworks and methodologies, but then also hopefully getting them on board with being agile in their thinking and really, coming up with what I like to call like a mashup of frameworks to address certain problems. And the way that I sort of teach design strategy is that you're not problem solving. You're really just trying to address a problem. And so it's really iterative, and you have to be willing to do the work to continue to work with community, to work at the challenge, the problem that you're trying to address. That shows up in teaching, and it also shows up in my practice as a whole. So very excited to be here to really discuss what moving at this pace of trust looks like, what equitable development looks like. So very excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you both for, introducing yourselves and giving us just a little bit of a taste of what you guys do. And obviously, you both have been doing this for some time. So I want to start this conversation by reading a quick passage from Principle 9. And so it starts by saying, when relationships, whether the communities within companies, with vendors and partners, business partners, or across sectors, are built with integrity and empathy, trust can be developed and maintained on both sides. Given the history of the industry and its current lack of diversity, real estate is not starting from a neutral place and must actively make efforts to overcome past harms. To earn trust, real estate professionals must work with local communities and racialized groups. Accountability is critical for ensuring that development has accomplished the community's vision and for continuing to build credibility. And I want to open up the floor to both Elaine and Courtney to sort of give us your initial reactions to that passage, considering both of your levels of experience and just your thoughts on trust and transparency in the development process.
So, I mean, one of the things that immediately comes to mind, and working with developers, the challenge is that you're typically in a development process or project. You're coming into a project because, and you're engaging because you have something to benefit from. You're coming in with a project. You're coming in because you're going to build something and invest, and you're trying to create something. So there's an inherent, I want to say, like, transactional nature to that, or it can have a transactional nature where it can feel extractive if you're not kind of cautious and thoughtful about it. So I think this point of, how do we not starting from a neutral place is really, it's really real. And what that means is there's all this investment of time and relationship building that's really valuable and necessary before you can get to that part where you're sort of asking for how does the development fit into this place. So the thing that we try and encourage or think about is, how do you start as early as possible? How are you really embedded in that community that you're trying to be a part of and trying to build within, and participating in a way where you're listening first and sort of not coming in with, here's my idea to make your community better, but, how can we work together to really understand what things you need to create the sort of future you want to live in? And it's an attitude shift, and it's an investment difference, especially around just time, and kind of creating more time in the projects that allow for that kind of experience. And time is a very precious commodity in real estate in many things, and market factors really challenge that. So I think the biggest thing is, in the absence of time, how do you get to some of that depth of relationship? And what are the things that you can do to create a more transformational and relational experience with community versus a transactional experience?
I think that's a really great point, Elaine. Building relationships definitely takes quite a bit of time. I think something that really comes up in my work that I've been trying to navigate through, and have, since starting this work, have seek sort of additional support and education, is around trauma-informed practices. A lot of the times, it's saying here that real estate isn't starting from a neutral place. I would even say that real estate is, most of the times, especially in Baltimore City, is starting from a place of, historically, from a place of harm, right? And so how do you undo that harm? How do you address that harm? How do you allow people within the community to really give voice and acknowledge and give name to the traumas that have, transpired, and then really move past that, right? And so that definitely takes some time. And a lot of the work that I do, if I'm given the opportunity to, I like to really come in and spend that time in that historical sort of context, in order to really give people the space to process it and to really be acknowledged. A lot of the times, especially with larger development projects, those folks have not had the space to really process, what has happened collectively. And there is something about that shared experience, navigating through that to then find out what the shared value is moving forward, to then better inform the development that's coming. And so I think that collective space together, really processing that trauma and moving forward to find that shared value to me, has the best sort of response. And I would say what has the most sustainable solutions, if you will, for the developer, right? And so it really helps with community stewardship and buy-in. Folks really feel like it's a place that they've healed and really transformed. And so that takes a lot of time, though. So a lot of the times when I come into a project, I like to, sort of tell folks, the developers, and even sometimes the architects who bring me in, that this is going to be a very long process. I mean, 6 months is even a very rushed process. It does take a lot of time to sort of process and navigate through the historical context and then try to get people to a place where they can collectively dream together. I think development in general is sort of really just one layer of sort of the human experience, right? And so there are all these systems that people have had to navigate through. And so just to sort of live in that space of development, whether it's the built environment or I would say housing or a commercial space, really doesn't acknowledge other systems. And so a lot of the engagement work that I do takes time because we have to go through all the layers of that human experience and really acknowledge what's been done and then get people to dream. And that, once again, takes a lot of time, but it's very relationship based. It's very intentional work. But I think at least acknowledging that real estate is not starting from a neutral place is definitely a great step in the right direction.
Yes, I'm glad you both sort of pointed out this aspect of time that I think sometimes gets lost in this process. And by that I mean just the fact that like sometimes I think communities aren't given the time, and maybe Elaine said this, aren't giving the time to process said traumas. And so I think when a developer is coming in and saying, hey, I want to do this or I want to do that, I think oftentimes that concern is sort of on the back burner, and it does in a lot of ways become what feels like something transactional. And so yes, I would say time plays a very important part in how you approach the community. And I think the level of honesty and transparency at that level is extremely important. So thank you both for really pointing that out. And so digging deeper into Principle 9, obviously, like there's a spectrum that gauges the community engagement from just checking a box or simply completing a collaboration and deference. And so have you seen this spectrum of community engagement to ownership? Have you both in your experience seen that spectrum play out in the field or steps in real estate that can help to achieve sort of this highest level of community engagement?
That's a really great question. And so just thinking about the spectrum of community engagement, I think as a practitioner, it can be a bit challenging to navigate. Because I own my own practice, I tend to take on projects that are in alignment with me and the mission of my studio. And I get fully invested, right, in these projects. And I think it can be a bit challenging to navigate where on the spectrum the actual client wants to be. And I think it takes a couple of conversations, right? So the projects that I don't take on are the projects where folks do just want to check a box, right? It's those projects where you look at the RFP or you have a conversation with the client and they say, oh, we want to have 3 community engagement meetings. that to me is an initial red flag. And what I try to do is in my response or in conversations that I have with developers or even with, architects or even the government, really say, yes, this is where we're going to start. Because I think community town halls or meetings can be a good place to sort of share out. But it's such an old way of engaging with the community. So a lot of the times I layer in so much more in my RFP proposals or in conversations that I have with folks who are doing development. And I think I originally started out putting that in my proposals like an a la carte, like you can choose to do these things. But at the end of the day, if you really want community stewardship, you have to pour back value into the community, right? So it was mentioned earlier, Elaine mentioned that developers come into a situation where they're trying to develop something and that they're trying to get some sort of value out of that, right? And so putting up a building or building a new library or a new school, well, while I know those things eventually have value, but it may not be that additional value that the community is looking for. So you have to give folks some sort of value within the process. And so for me, that shows up in youth programming, storytelling, block parties. It shows up in filming, doing archival work. It shows up in skill sharing and teaching folks not only how to organize, but how to advocate for themselves, how to navigate the design process. So, in a way, I feel my ultimate goal as a design strategist is to really work myself out of a job. Like, I want to train up the community so much that they don't even need me anymore, right? They already have all the tools, all the resources that they need to be able to navigate this sort of real estate world on their own. So for me, I think regardless of whether the client pays for it or not, I tend to at least do some sort of skill sharing, or at least one person from the community has got to have some of the skills that I have. And then that's sort of how I look at the spectrum. But I don't know, I think it can be a bit challenging once again to really understand that developer and to know what they really want and try to convince them to do just a tiny bit more.
Yeah, the things that sort of prompted for me as Courtney was talking. Yeah, definitely capacity building. I mean, so we've talked a lot, just kind of what that falls into. Again, back to like development timelines they're in a way they're short and in a way they're long. Like the part where they want to engage with community tends to be on the shorter side, but the time till like a project is realized and the economic benefits come can be very far away. So one of the things that, again, thinking about how do we make these projects or these experiences have value for the group that we're engaging, what are the short wins? What are the things that are going to be meaningful to them tomorrow, instead of, in 5 years, you'll have this benefit. So I think everything Courtney mentioned is absolutely spot on in terms of, there's a lot of ways that can show up. But that capacity building is sort of the root of it. Creating, like, are there small projects that start to emerge that, what a development partner can help to support? So if it's as simple as we're going to help with a block cleaning or transforming the small green space or doing some sort of tree planting program in a neighborhood that really needs it, those can be ways to sort of, again, create immediate experience and value for that community that's being engaged, that contributes to that follow through, that action, to that relationship building long term. So that was one thing that kind of came to mind, Courtney, as you were talking just about, the value of small wins, and that those capacity building efforts as very meaningful for helping to build and foster relationship. The other, just kind of thinking about the spectrum, one of the things that the biggest shift, kind of, if we look at the 0 through 5, is that from 4 to 5. And that's really because decision-making power is shifting, and the power dynamic is shifting. And so I think, that's something that I think commercial real estate has to continue to explore and understand what that looks like. I've heard in this, there's been different conversations, of course, when a community is coming to you and you're able to, do work on their behalf. So I've had that experience and opportunity, and that's very exciting because that kind of falls into 5. Community is driving the process, and therefore they are the decision makers. And that's been exciting to participate in. I haven't been in as many experiences where a developer is sort of handing over power to community, so to speak. But oftentimes there's more where you're seeing, I'll say, like advisory bodies or advisory groups that are helping support decision making. So that can be a community advisory board that is kind of supporting decision making in tandem with the developer. So that there's some proxies that we've seen that are trying to get closer to that. I think the other thing that, is the difference between 4 and 5 is also on the wealth building side. With the titles here are delegated power to community ownership. And community, if we think about community ownership, again, for commercial real estate or just real estate in general, it's kind of it's a different way of having to think. So some of the things that I've seen people explore have been things related to condominium models for a commercial building, or, breaking down large parcels into much smaller parcels so that they're more easily able to be purchased or owned by individuals in that community. I've seen conversations around cooperative ownership models. So I think, or even, land trusts, if you want to take it even further. So I think there's some different ways to continue to explore this idea of community ownership, but I would say that's on the more nascent side. And I think there's a lot of people talking about it, but I haven't seen as much there yet. But I feel like we're on that path to where that's going to be a bigger part of the conversation.
I think that's a really great point, Elaine. I think that co-ownership, building in that wealth building, is really important. I'd love to see more projects that take that sort of approach. One thing I will say, I've been working with some nonprofit real estate development companies that have been at least open to having conversation with, say, community members around what real estate development could look like for them. And so they're willing to share their performers. They're willing to share language that they've used to win grants and how they've structured their nonprofit. So I have started to see sort of that knowledge sharing happening, which is not direct sort of wealth building, but it is at least sharing the knowledge to be able to eventually build your own wealth, which I think has been new within the past few years. And that to me is a little exciting, because I think there's enough room for everyone to sort of co-build, if you will, their environments. And so it's been interesting to have that knowledge being shared, because for a very long time, it's been a very sort of a tight-lipped process. And so that transparency is really starting, at least on the nonprofit side, I've seen. And then I've also seen folks on the commercial side of real estate maybe take on non-equity partners from the community that bring some sort of expertise. And, they're sort of compensated that way. So I think there's a few different models beyond sort of owning, or I would say the ownership of the building space and land.
Yeah, just that knowledge sharing piece, I think is really important. As long as I've been in the sort of social enterprise, social innovation space, one of the things that I've noted that's really interesting and different is how willing people are to share. And I think it's that sort of recognition that if we lift all boats, that's going to be better for the industry, for everybody. So just that willingness to kind of share a lot of detail, the tactics, the how-to, the numbers behind everything. There's a lot of generosity in that way, and I found that to be really heartening. And yeah, I think everyone's trying to do better. So just the more that everyone can learn from each other, the more we're going to have an impact and kind of see better practices across the industry. So I'm pretty excited by a lot of the things Courtney just mentioned, and I've definitely been seeing that on our end too.
So thank you both. That was a great approach to this question. And I think also just pointing out like how important it is to sort of share knowledge, but also being able to establish short term or smaller wins, as Courtney put it, but also sort of the longer term, larger wins that I think start to help this process go beyond what some could see as transactional above the surface. But at this point, you really start to dig in to really address these issues on a much deeper level. And so I think with that point, I think it would be a great time to transition into what it takes to have great partnerships. And so I'll take this time to transition this over to.
Hi everyone, Kevin Porter here. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Urban Land Institute of Baltimore's DEI podcast. Today's conversation kicks off a compelling two-part series where we delve into principles 9 and 10 of the ULI's 10 Principles for Equitable Development. Stay tuned for the next installment of Moving at the Pace of Trust, and a big thank you to our insightful guests, Courtney Morgan and Elaine Asal. If you found this conversation valuable, please be sure to tune in for more. Don't forget to like and share this podcast wherever you discover it. And as always, we at the DEI Committee encourage you to reflect deeply on diversity, equity, and inclusion and its vital role in our industry. Thank you.